Hello, hi, hey, what's happening? Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I'm contemplating a few things right now when it comes to just looking at what's around me, because we have a over sort of stimulation going on for a lot of us. And I'm just trying to remember what things were like when you didn't really have too many options. Because I'm not like going on any of these tech detoxes things. A lot of people seem to do that, right? I've been avoiding my phone for the past 5 months. I don't know why it usually happens in an American accent. Usually it's an Indian with an American accent, at least the ones I encounter. But everything seems to be needing a detox, a revitalization, your body and your mind, and you go from a retreat to a retreat, and you do the same thing for your phone. You abstain from social media, and you switch off your devices, and you go away to the mountains. And I feel if you can't do that at home, there's no point going anywhere to do it. Just my 2 cents, or 2 paise, or 2 rupees, whatever currency, man. I'm global, I'm inclusive. But what I feel is remembering some things, because with this kind of rapid sort of introduction to so many things, we just bounce from one thing to the next, right? And suddenly we feel like Threads is outdated now, just like one of those fucking crazy things. Like Clubhouse, what the hell is that, man? That's so fucking done with. After Clubhouse, I got like 10 invitations to be on things like Wisdom and Fireside, and I felt really, my God, this is amazing. They're inviting to me to be on their platform. Just like recently, I got invited to be a chief guest at one of these things by Teach for India, right? I think they did a musical, and they said, would you like to be our chief guest? And I was like, wow, I'm really honored to be invited. And then I realized that it's everyone who's got more than 5 followers has been asked to be a chief guest. I don't know if it's more than 5, but clearly if they've approached me, then their threshold is really low. Anyway, I hope it went off well. Just to put that out there. I'm not trying to diss them. It's just that I felt like being included as a chief guest was a special thing, but now it seems like the social media footprint isn't really that important. But that's an interesting thing now with anything we create, right? We usually are told to be authentic and unique in our ideas, and don't try to repeat what someone else has already done and succeeded with, because that won't work for you. That formula is done and dusted with. But it's so hard to kind of think and create in isolation, because again, you're told to create and collaborate. Because when I do this podcast, you know, what I enjoy is, of course, talking to you guys and getting guests and getting their story and the conversation out to you, and also expressing my curiosity and my questions that I might have, and try to, you know, kind of let some of that float around, knock around in my head to kind of challenge the ways I view the world, or the value system I hold, and the way I look at people, and the way I share ideas, and the way I hold things important or unimportant. But what the past 2.5 years of doing this podcast, you know, maybe even longer, 3 years or 4 years, because I started this off as a solo podcast called The Baby Bed, which now has moved into the SoapyRao show, which has interviews, is with anything, whether it's a workout, whether it's a project like a podcast, or whether it's stand-up or anything. This what is important, I feel, to recognize for me is enjoy the process of understanding and learn from that, right? As opposed to have a projection of, okay, Bill Burr does a podcast, or there's the WTF with, who's that? Mark Maron, or whatever, these big podcasts, or the Joe Rogan Experience, or these massive ones, or whatever it is. It could be, you know, Tim Ferriss, or these big names. And then you subtly try to sort of use elements of their podcast, you know, whether it's the way they present the topic, or whether the way they have the introduction, or the way they kind of lead in with the guests. And it's just natural that we do that, because we're constantly listening to these big success podcasts of big successful comedians. And this happens in stand-up as well. These are the 2 things I know, so I'm talking about that, where you're thinking of a premise, or you're thinking of how this would work, and then you would do it in someone's voice, saying, how would Bill Burr do this? How would Chappelle do this? But I don't know if that's helpful, because, yeah, you kind of always look at a successful artist, and you try to not replicate, but try to say, okay, if that person's worked, and there's a reason why that's worked. But I feel, and this is not to sound patronizing in any way, but being your own teacher, and your product being your own coach, or teaching you what you must do, I think is the best way, because especially in an overflow and an over kind of exposure to information, to ideas, to creations, and to creators, I think it's very easy to get carried away with what you must do or mustn't do, what you should do, what you should try to replicate, what should be your standard operating procedure. But what gives you a sense of understanding, which is one is that, nothing's going to happen overnight. It can for a few, very few. But I feel seeing what you're doing in itself change just by observing what you're doing for yourself. Like, when I started this out as a solo podcast, I was like not ready, I feel, to be a host, because I was just, I mean, when I look back, of course, a lot of this is hindsight, is 2020, right? I wanted to get comfortable talking to you on the mic and not sound like a total fool. And you can hear that journey. Maybe you still can. But from there to get to doing Life Gone Wrong, which was the Spotify thing, which I did, which was talking to people who have dealt with adversity and those stories and how they can help us, to coming to here today, made sense when I look back. But at that point, I was like, where's this going? Because I think this all comes down to, whether you believe this or not, or you have belief in this idea of, if you put in the work, if you enjoy doing it, there's an effort, I feel things work out in ways you don't plan, or in ways you don't expect, or in projections that you have don't really come through. Because I never knew I'd be doing this. And of course, you could say, but of course, this is something which might not work. Who knows, right? But I think understanding that even something like an exercise, there's no point getting results in 3 days or in 3 years, because, of course, it's good to get byproducts, right? And the byproducts can be anything. It could be from revenue to money to recognition to better guests to improving the way you do the podcast, or improving the way you ask questions or you interview, or in whatever the art form you're doing or the business you're doing. It's good to see results, but those can just be subtle, or could be things that you recognize and acknowledge as ways in which you've moved ahead with the project. But if that's the only goals you have, then I feel with anything, right? If you're standing on your head in yoga is the only achievement you have, then what is the thing that it's doing for you? Because after 5 years you achieve that, or in 6 months you achieve that, now people are getting yoga training or certification in 2 weeks. What does that do for you, right? Is it just that you can show off to the world and go tell 10 people, I'll teach you yoga because I got certification? Or is it the idea of doing that for a significant amount of time, so it becomes a part of your life and it becomes something that you do, and that in itself becomes a guide for your life? As you get older, you can't do certain things, you view certain things differently, your mind's in a different place. As you get even older, you have to face other things that are presented to you. And whether it's your art form, whether it's your exercise, whether it's your diet, if these can be lifelong companions, then I just feel as you face different things, these things which you can quote unquote call the constants and the tools for life, help you face life in a much more, I don't know if tolerable is the right word or balanced is the right word. Each person has their own sense of equilibrium or not, but it kind of helps the ups and downs feel a little less disconcerting. It doesn't throw you off balance as much. It doesn't make you feel the extremes as much. And I think that, along with acknowledging that every emotion is as important, and we shouldn't really hold on to one, because everyone seems to say, hold on, happiness is the only thing that you need. It's not sustainable, right? You can't be happy all the time. You're fucking nuts then, or you're on heroin, one of the two. And both aren't good, I've heard. But this is the thing that I'm trying to just kind of understand is, the podcast started somewhere, comedy started somewhere. I never knew in 2001 or 2007 when I entered college and graduated and left the US that I'd be doing shows on stage, visiting California, visiting New York, or visiting festivals across the Fringe in Edinburgh, or the ones in Australia. Or when I left radio in 2019, I would be doing a podcast 4 years later, talking to people from around the world. So it's not that I had a 5-year plan. I'm not a guy who plans. It's just that I made a conscious effort. And sometimes, you appreciate that effort when you look back. But yeah, I just wanted to I wanted to say that these are things that have helped me understand about who I am and what I enjoy doing. And if it means that it takes its own time and it shapes into what it needs to be at that point in time, I'm willing to give it its time, give it its due, and I hope that you guys can, well, someone's really pressing the horn, can stay on the journey with me. And even if you don't, I appreciate it. But if you do, of course, I do appreciate it. So before I go on sounding like I'm totally losing the plot, which I'm not, I hope, I want to talk about today's guest. He's a comedian. Again, he's a very established performer in the UK comedy scene. He's been in it for over 25 years. Originally from Canada, Glenn Will joins me today to talk about his comedy career, talk about his move from Canada to the UK, what that shift felt like, how those jokes were adapted, how he had to adapt as a road comic, as they call it in the industry, and how it's been, how it's been kind of navigating the whole path of what you want out of your art form. How do you enjoy being a performer? How do you balance the act of the various other things that come along with comedy, which is the fame, the fortune, the success, the thing of seeing other people come after you do better, the thing of seeing people who are less talented you be more funny, the whole industry and how comedy works. And of course, the whole narrative of where we are today. What does comedy reflect, and what is the responsibility of comedy or comedians in a day and age where intolerance is increasing, or thresholds for jokes are reducing, and people are getting offended, people are getting upset. So we talk about all of that, and of course about his association with different comedians and how that's helped him, and how he's decided and chosen what works for him and what he wants to do and what he wants to get out of comedy and what he wants to do with his life. So overall, a really fun conversation. And just a heads up, Glenn Will is the comedian who's with me today. He's going to be at the Fringe for the next couple of weeks. I think from the 14th till the end of August. So if you are in Edinburgh at the Fringe, to catch Glenn Will. Glenn, if you're listening, thanks for joining me, my friend. Good luck at the Fringe. And to all of you listening right now, as always, I appreciate it. Thanks. Till next week, goodbye. God bless. Take care of yourselves. Cheers. Thank you so much to start off with.
You're welcome.
I'm really excited to talk to you. And it turns out I was going through your website, and it turns out we were at the Fringe the same time in 2017.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
Excellent.
My first and last Fringe, I have to say that. I haven't been back since.
Yeah, I know a few people who have that story.
Yeah, I'm still paying off the credit card bill, so.
Yeah.
Gosh, my wife was like, I'm never going to be flyering shows for you again, because the show is called Blurred Lines, a blind Indian with a British hangover. And she was blind. And the first day she was like committed to it, right? She's like, Blind Indian with British hangover, a really cool show by a visually impaired comedian from India. The last day she's like, blind guy, he's all right, he's not that bad. She was just so tired.
I will pay you £5 to take this flyer.
Absolutely. Oh God, that was quite a hustle. And so what made you move from Canada to the UK, or more specifically to England, Glenn?
Well, initially it was when I was a very young man, around 22. It just seemed like there was better opportunities, stand-up wise. A lot of my countrymen were aiming at America and thinking that was the place to go. And I always thought Europe just looked a little better, and I was right. I managed to beat the rush over here. So there was a time about 25 years ago where I could get gigs just because they're like, oh, he's Canadian. Well, we haven't had one of those. Sure, we'll give him a crack, which is not the case now.
So this is pre-Russell Peters, is it?
What do you mean?
No, because a lot of Indian, Asian comedians kind of nod their heads and thank Russell Peters for opening the market for South Asian sort of comedy. But did that ever be a benefit for him going so big, like in 2004, 2005? Did that help other Canadian comedians?
Yeah. But yeah, that would have been, well, Russell would have been coming over at around the same time. I definitely worked with him a lot. It was funny. I never worked with him when I lived in Vancouver, but on several different occasions. I think he sort of noticed the same thing and was coming over at the same time.
Right.
So it was not pre, it was not post, it was during Russell Peters.
Nice. No, no. The reason I mentioned Russell Peters not just because he's an Indian, Asian, sort of Canadian Indian comedian. It's just that Canadian comedians are. I worked with a couple. I'm sure you know them. I'm sure Phil Nickel and Paul Meyerhog. I think they've moved to
Oh
the
yes,
UK.
yeah, yeah, very good guys. Yeah, very very good mates of mine. We took a holiday to Amsterdam together once, and that's about all I can say about that trip.
Yeah, Phil came down to Bangalore for a show at one of the rooms I was running back in the day, about maybe 7-8 years back, and he does his, of course, musical set with his guitar, and man, the energy was crazy. And then in 2017, a friend took me to the Abattoir, which was where the after party was happening, and a lot of the comedians, like the Colin Mockeries and the who's the other guy who was there that night? It was the why am I forgetting his name? The guy who's the offensive comedian, Jimmy Carr. So he was there, and Daniel Schloss
yeah.
was there. And suddenly I see Phil Nickel. I'm like, holy shit, what are you doing? And it was so nice to just catch up with him. And it was really nice that he remembered me, bought me a drink, and I was like, wow, this is really, really nice to be in this environment. But the thing is when someone like me sitting here in a comedy scene which is about 11 to maybe 12 years old, and we kind of look at American comedians, Canadian comedians, British comedians, and the English comedy scene, there's a difference that we notice, right? Like the Irish, the English comedians are a little bit more storytellers, they're a little bit more free-flowing when it comes, but when it comes to like the American comedians, it's very calculated. Every word is sort of put in there for a purpose. So how did you navigate that path, or is that even true as an observation from my end?
Yeah. I think you are right. There's longer form and there's shorter form. I think the reason that happens is in America you don't do as long of shows. So the European style is sort of write a 1 hour show, take it to a festival, and then you get bookings like that. So I always benefited because my start was in North America, where I was able to write really short and concise jokes. But I moved over to Europe about 3 years after. So I've got I can play it both ways if you want.
Nice. So the thing is, the transition for you, like moving from Canada to the UK and then fitting into that, I wouldn't say the comedy scene, but kind of fitting in, and then making comedic observations or bits. So how did you play that? Did you play it as a Canadian looking into British society, or did you kind of settle in and then tell your story as a person who's moved in and making local observations as a person from outside?
Yeah, no, you always act like you don't. It's always there's more benefit in the crowd not knowing how much you actually know about where you are, because then you can play stupid, and then and then right at the end, if you reveal the cards, that you know exactly what you're talking about and exactly like you're saying, you can get 2 laughs out of it. But so yeah, unless I absolutely have to, I'll but then after a while people are coming specifically to see you, so you can't act like if you guys drive on the left side, wow, it blew my mind.
Right. Yeah, we would have that in Bangalore about, I don't know how many years back now, maybe 10 plus, maybe 15 years back. We got a new airport, and it's pretty far out from the city. So every visiting comedian would be like, oh my God, your Bangalore airport, man, it's closer to another city, like which is Hyderabad, which is 500 kilometers away. I'm like, is it there local? I'm like, oh, come on. After the 15th time, you're like, guys, get over it, right? We live with this, and it's pretty fine. So yeah, I totally feel what you're saying.
Well, I always like it when the airport's far away from the city. It just seems like a really good idea, because, there's only a small percentage it'll crash, but
Yeah.
if it does, you don't want that to be downtown.
Yeah.
You want that to be in a farmer's field, or
Yeah.
it just makes more sense. It's a pretty big thing coming into you don't want to be as many people concentrated in that area as you possibly can.
And the bigger thing is that the more number of houses you have, like around these airports, you have more people putting out shit, like, putting out food and putting out garbage. And then you have these birds coming in. And the last thing you want is like a state of the art, like A350 getting pulled down by a crow, right? That'd just be.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly. The city, yeah. Yeah, cities are cities. Canada suffers from that a lot, where they didn't have town planners when they were putting the towns together, and some of these places are in gorgeous settings, nestled in the mountain, and they got the pulp mill in the middle of town, and everything smells like a pulp mill.
Yeah. So you live in London now?
No, I live in Suffolk. The closest city to me is Ipswich, but yeah, I've moved out to the country to raise my little children. And
so how is that? How is that work? I mean, were you ever in London when it was like sort of the like before family life?
Oh yes, I was. Yeah, those were some heady times. I don't. Yeah, I don't miss them, but I remember them fondly. But yeah, it's much better. It's much better this way for little ones. That's kind of a busy city for trying to get a kid to cross the road.
Yeah. No, so how has that been? How has that story changed for you? Being someone who's on the road and someone who's kind of totally immersed in comedy and totally working from that angle, and now you kind of have a much more slower life, living out of the city, living out of like the hustle and bustle, but then you have to go back and kind of get that energy back on there. So do you find a difference from now being a parent to pre-family life?
No, I enjoy it because I get the best of both worlds. I get to be home with my family a lot. I don't do the international stuff much anymore, but there was a 5-year period in my life where I got signed to a big agency in America. So for 5 years, I didn't really have a home. I was just circling the globe, doing gigs. I had 3 agents. I had European ones, I had American ones, and I had Australian ones, and they'd all fight for my time. So it didn't make sense to have an apartment.
Right.
So I just lived, going from hotel to hotel, it was fun at the start, but it wasn't much fun at the end. Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is I sort of got all the wanderlust out there, and I ended up, I didn't move back to the UK. I moved back to Canada and bought a condominium in Vancouver. And I thought that I was just going to live in Canada the rest of my life. And then it's actually kind of a weird story. My wife's best friend tweeted to me on my wife's birthday and said, this is my best friend. She's your biggest fan. Could you say happy birthday to her? And I sort of tweeted back, and I was like, look, I don't really do stuff like that. And then of course I looked at her picture, and I was like, okay, but in this case I can say happy birthday because I want. And so, I said happy birthday, and then her friend was like, she's single and you should marry her. And I was like, I still didn't want to be creepy. Like, it was people that had gotten a hold of me, like, as fans. So I was like, well, I wouldn't want to put anybody through that sort of punishment. It's like, still just keeping it on just a jovial level. And then I was back. This is and every once in a while, her or her friend would tweet to me. We'd have little back and forths about something we'd seen that was funny, but it was all just very because you don't want to be a creeper online.
Yeah. Clearly, those things are coming back to bite us, right? If we have put them out there in the past.
Exactly. Well, I mean, that just goes to show you that, I wasn't even thinking about, like, I don't want a recording of this, but that definitely is what, it's what the kids call receipts now. Um,
Yeah.
but uh, yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just like, you don't want to, you know, yeah, you don't want to extend yourself in that way and have somebody go like, look, I just liked your comedy. I don't,
Yeah.
can you get off my lawn, please? Well, uh,
Yeah, but
so
yeah.
yeah, I ended up, the reason she knew who I was, I did a podcast with Frankie Boyle, and
Mm,
that's her actual favorite comedian. It's not
mm,
me. It's just I was the one that responded to. Apparently, there was, her friend did, like, send out 4 messages that day to different people that she enjoyed the work of, and said, "Could you say happy birthday?" And I was the only one that was available.
that's
But
brilliant.
yeah.
Nice. Uh,
Um, so anyway, I was back in, London opening up for Frankie at a Soho Theatre gig, and she tweeted the next day like, "Oh, I can't believe it! My favorite comedian. I got tickets to my favorite comedian, and my second favorite comedian was opening for him." And she
mm,
tagged me, and I was like, "Oh, I didn't like. I just left it. It hadn't turned my phone on, so I only got that tweet the next day, and I was like, well, maybe we should meet up for a drink just
mm.
as friends, like friends would do if you're not busy." And yeah, and the rest is history. We couldn't help it. We liked each other, and I don't feel creepy because I married her and had 2 children with her. So if it's, I'm not a player at that point.
Well, that worked out, right? She's not going to go back to those tweets and say, "See what you did." That's good.
Yeah. I had to take her Twitter account away. I know what you do.
That's a great story because it's, as you mentioned, you get these messages from people who like your work, and in your head, or at least in my head, it's like, wow, like the whole world's attention is on me right now, even though it's just one person, and it's just a line saying, "Loved your show last night." But it's how we perceive it, right? Like our ego just gets such a boost. And then, as you said, it's so easy to get carried away going, yeah, you know what? They really like my joke from last time. Maybe I'm going to move next door to them. And
Yeah.
and it's the reality isn't that. But no,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I'm quite fascinated by the whole kind of, I wouldn't say journey, but the way your comedy career has kind of not just where it's taken you, but how it's taken you, because it's a different time from when I started. I started back in 2010, and I stopped for a while now since the pandemic. But how more than like the gigs you did or the open mics or how you got into comedy, I'm just interested to know how it kind of took you on what journey, because you said you had that 5-year thing of just going around the world, being managed by different people. So how did you kind of play out your comedy cards, if that's something that you focused on? Did you plan it out, saying, okay, the first 5 years I'll do these festivals, and I'll get on Letterman or the equivalent of that, and then I'll do the clubs, then I'll become a road comic. So how did that pan out for you? Did you have a plan, or did you have a 20-year, I'm going to sustain being a comedian? How did that? How did you approach that?
No, I didn't. I didn't really have a plan. But I do. I do. I would say I try to keep true to myself. Try to keep writing as much as I can, and honing it. And that's what Edinburgh is good for, because every time you do it, you need a new hour. So you're constantly, working on new jokes. But it's funny. Now that I've become a dad and I've got 2 young kids, I don't want to be on the road very much anymore. I don't mind going on the weekends, but the more I'm at, the more I miss here. So to get proficient at podcasts and podcasting, I think that's the future for me, because I'm in my bedroom right now. My kids are at school. My wife's gone and had a cup of coffee, and there you go. And I'll be here when they come back.
Right.
It's much, and that was never a plan, but it seems to be working out. My new, I've got a podcast with a guy named Andrew Maxwell, and it's we started it and this, you talk about planning ahead. This is the one time I've had a plan that lasted longer than 6 months, and it all worked out. Because me and Maxwell, we were practicing podcasting for a good 4 or 5 months, with the idea that we'll start releasing stuff a year after we've been practicing, just to make sure we hit the ground running. And Jim Jeffries, who's an old mate of mine, got a hold of me and said, "Look, I'm coming back to England. Do you want to open up for me on the tour?" And I said, yes, I do. Arenas for a month. And he was like, "Well, who should we get as the other opener?" And I said, "Well, why don't we do this? We'll get Andrew Maxwell also on the bill. And then, because we're working on a podcast, so every night we'll start releasing the podcast a week before the tour starts. And then every night we'll be performing in front of 3,000 people, and we can put a barcode up, and they can scan it, and we can get a nice base for our new endeavor." And everything worked. It all worked out.
So you got the people who came with Jim Jeffries to kind of subscribe to your podcast.
Yeah.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, and it's even more brilliant because it came out of my head, and that's not the way I usually do things. I usually wait till the day before, and I'm like, okay, well, I wish I'd had this idea 6 months ago. We could have done something about it. But every little piece worked. That's
brilliant, because that's automatically 1 month times 2,000-3,000 people. That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, not everybody subscribed, but it's a nice base, and the podcast is now going very well, and it's starting to grow even more. But just that little push, that little nudge, but all it took was somebody to see it from 6 months away. And I truly believe that having kids made that possible, because I think if I was still as disorganized as you're always as disorganized as your life will allow you to be.
I totally get that. So now I want to understand, because it's so it really strikes a chord with me, because I've been doing it for many many years less than you've been doing it for, but just around 2020, when shows stopped and you had to do these online shows on Zoom with 500 people, out of which 2 people have their videos and mics on, the rest are just on mute, which is ridiculous. I have to tell you this, though. I was doing it was for diversity and inclusion. They're like, as a person with a visual impairment, could you talk about this on World Disability Day or something? And it was about 500 people for this corporate. And after I spoke, a guy who was hearing impaired wanted to ask me a question, and the moderator's like, "Hey, Deepak, you're on mute." I'm like, "Oh, for fuck's sake, can you make the words a little bit more sensitive, dude? Like, can you not?" Oh my God. And it's just ridiculous how we you just use these words without realizing.
No, I always thought it was very unfair to people who can't speak that's still called dumb. Like, come on, we can surely, like, you got to change one of those words. We either can't say dumb anymore, or just, orally impaired. I don't know.
I mean, you've gone from going fat to horizontally challenged, and you don't want to hurt the feeling of those people, but a person who can't speak is written off because.
Yeah, it seems like especially there's another one too, like in football when they're like, oh, they've got a very anemic offense, as to say that it's not. And I was just like, that's a real condition. How did that slip through? And you're still allowed to call things anemic.
That's
All the
crazy. Yeah.
anemic people are out there are like, could you not just say they don't have a very good striker? Do you have to bring my condition into this?
Yes. Or they should put a positive spin around dumb. Like, if someone's really quiet and someone's really observant and listens all the time, man, that guy is such a dumb bastard. Just maybe. I would like that. Maybe that would be more effective.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So,
let me tell you a quick story about.
Yeah, please do.
Zoom gigs. You reminded me when you were saying, I did one during the pandemic, just one, and it was for a Dutch company. Uber Eats, just randomly. It doesn't matter, but. And of course, this came through kind of at the end of the second lockdown, so I hadn't done a gig in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And they, you could see all the people up in their little squares and stuff, and the promoters talking to him all, going, he's a very very he's from Canada. I think you're really going to enjoy him. So, ladies and gentlemen, Glenn Wool, and I start doing my act, and I'm just like this, just sitting there, just trying to remember my jokes, and I can see all these squares of people just sort of looking, and about 5 minutes in, the promoter gets on the mic, and he goes, "Excuse me, can everybody please turn your mics on? Turn the mute off because it's really eerie." Glenn's getting no reaction, and just out of the silence, all of them went, "They're on." No problem there, sir.
Yeah. This isn't a technical glitch.
No.
And it's, the worst, I think, more than them not laughing, what would get me, at least if they listen, okay, I'm like, you know what, it's just a bit awkward, right? But what would get me is suddenly you would hear someone, taking their plate to the kitchen to wash it, and you hear the sink go on. I'm like, dude, that's just it's a bit much. Or the sound of something flushing. I'm like, oh, that's just even more insulting than not laughing. Yeah. But there was a weird thing sitting down. So the thing is, when everything closed, there's this early onset of panic. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to forget this art form. My last bit, the last show which I killed, I'm never going to recreate that feeling. A lot of that I could hear from people that, we need to do anything to start these Zoom online open mics. And I'll be honest, I tried an open mic online. There were 3 people, and it was awful. But then I really quickly, relatively speaking, realized, you know what, man, this is ridiculous. Okay, unless it's a well-paid corporate gig and I'm just going to get the money, I'm not going to do this because it really didn't feel good for me. But then, as you were saying, this idea of sitting down and talking to into a microphone, not in a structured stand-up delivery way, but just putting out ideas, but you're not hearing laughter. Just like as you said, even if people are there, they're not laughing. So it gave me this idea of doing this, because that's around when I started focusing a lot more on the solo version of this podcast, which 2 years back became a talk format. So how do you look at it? Because for me, like last year, my wife and I had a baby girl, and she's 1 now. And for me, this is, and that's why. Thank you so much. It resonates with what you're saying, because I get to be at home. I haven't got back on stage after things have opened up yet, but I really enjoy this, right? Because I get to talk to people like you who've been in the industry. I talk to people from all sorts of different lines of work and areas of interest. But what was your draw to podcasts and podcasting, and as a performance artist, how do you find the medium, and how do you adapt, and how does it compare to comedy or compare to stand-up, if that's even comparable?
Well, yeah, it does compare. But I was lucky enough, me and Andrew Maxwell have been very good friends for a long time. So what we do, the podcast is called Egypts of the World, and Egypts is an Irish term. It basically means idiot in Irish.
Okay.
So yeah, we sort of scroll the news in our personal lives, And every week we bring who we found in the news to be who's been being an idiot that week, and we just sort of riff on it. But
Right.
really, it's it's not a million miles away from what our phone calls used to be like. Like sometimes we'd just call each other up and go, "Hey, have you seen this guy?" And so what it is, it's basically us making each other laugh for an hour.
Nice.
So, and that's not generally stand up, but like in those phone calls, I definitely there's been times where I said something and then I'm like, I'm gonna try that on stage. That'll work. I know that'll work.
Yeah.
So it was a form of stand up where and sometimes we would have an idea and we'd call the other guy up. So it's like seeing a different side of it, but it's still, I think it's interesting and it's still funny just to hear two buddies joking around like that. So it's not exactly stand up, but then it doesn't have to be. And I have got bits from doing the podcast that people don't seem to mind if they've heard him on the podcast, and they're like, oh, I see what he's done there. I see how he's crowbarred that into the conversation.
Nice.
So yeah, that's I think it's finding the joy in it, because I resisted a lot on the internet for a long time. I think I was a late adapter. But I like the way that it's gone now, and it's like you say. I think I had to see the reward of the the reward is I'm around my family much more than I would have been, and there's a lot going on the road that there's just not me anymore. I just don't I don't want to drink all night and party all day and then roll onto stage like some, rock star. Those days are done, and I don't need to.
Yeah.
I've got the memories. I've got half the memories, but that's all you need.
Yeah, no, because when we sit on the outside or someone entering the world of being a stand-up comedian, there seems to be a lot of attractions when you look at the like when I remember going in for my auditions at the Comedy Store when they had their club in Bombay. This is like 2010. So that's
I
when
remember that. I loved that.
Yeah. So have you been to the Bombay Comedy Store when it was there?
Oh yeah.
Okay, lovely. Okay.
I think I did it 4 times. Yeah.
So you remember how it was, right? It was like quite upscale. It was in this really posh mall, and for me, I was blown away. I said, "Wow, this is." And then I remember meeting the people who were headlining that time. It was Mandy Knight and Dave Fulton and Curtis Walker, Sean Meo, and Paul Williams. I forget who else was there, but Ian Coppinger. And there's this idea that you think it's like everyone's like Dave Chappelle or everyone's like Robin Williams, where it's private jets, and so you have this notion in your head, and you only hear about Madison Square Garden or these big rooms, and then you meet these comedians who are so funny, but then they give you the real story. I've been doing it for 25 years, and you think, oh, is it all about partying and drugs? They're like, yeah, it was for a few years, but the reality is that you can't sustain that, right? So yeah, it's really amazing how between the open micer and the Dave Chappelle, there's so many different opportunities for comedians. There's so many different paths for a comedian to take, and what I wouldn't say advice, but how do you navigate that? How do you manage your expectations? How do you manage the opportunistic thinking? Like, because in the Indian comedy scene, being much younger, there's some people who just catapulted to success without as much work. I'm not taking away from the work they've done, but just without as much time. But there's some people who are slogging away who still are at a 40, 50-seater room, and we don't have too many established comedy clubs in the country. But yeah, so how does one? Is it a personal kind of what suits you, or is there a trajectory? Or
well, I mean, I give you, and this is advice I give to any young comic, and it sort of transfers. It transfers over to anybody, and I'm glad I realized it very early in my career, because it certainly has helped the thought of it, and that is just it's a simple one sentence piece of advice, and that is other people's successes are not your failures.
That's brilliant. Why it's brilliant for me is because I was living absolutely that towards the beginning of the lockdown, like the last few years before the lockdown, 2018, 19. It was basically, if someone did well, it reflected that I'm not funny enough, I'm not good enough. If someone sold 1,000-seater, I'm like, you're a loser, like, to me. And that's why I
you can't live like that.
Yeah, and I took a break because the non-essential aspects of comedy, which was the fame, the fortune, how many tickets, Netflix specials, that was occupying my mind more than enjoying the jokes. And, what you just said is,
Well, here's the heart of it, and it's one thing I try and keep close to my consciousness, is that what I love about this business, what I absolutely love, is making people laugh. Mm-hmm. And if I'm on a bill and I don't have the best set that somebody else does, I'm glad, because for whatever reason, like I want that whole room to laugh. And if I don't have the goods, or if they just for some reason don't like people like me, and that happens, it's the reason there is a mixed bill. I just want everybody to laugh, and that extends to if somebody I think is not very funny sells out 10,000 seats in an arena and everybody has a great night, well, it doesn't matter what I think. It matters that 10,000 people have had a little respite from their lives, and they've had a laugh, and you can go, well, why don't they? I wanted to be the one to make them laugh. Just be happy that they're laughing, and you'll get your chance. And there's people that you can make laugh that those 10,000 seat arena comics can't make laugh. So focus on them, and then maybe one day they'll know 10,000 people and they'll all come see an arena. But you don't worry about the gigs you're not doing. You put all your heart into the ones you are doing. It's not, if somebody doesn't want to book you, well, just don't play their club. Go play somewhere else. There's not one path either. Like, there's so many people who've gotten famous in so many different ways that to sort of focus on one thing, it's a negative emotion. And I actually, it's funny, we're talking about India. I just read a long book called The Anarchy. I don't know if you've ever read that. It's about the British East India Company.
Uh-huh.
And just the horrors that they inflicted on India. But there was one point, one of the guys that was the head of the company, who actually came to India, and he really liked India, and he liked the people, and it was opening his mind to a lot of things. And the one thing he brought back to England, and he was trying, and people just couldn't get their head around this as a philosophy, but it is Indian of origin. He said, if the application is perfect, the outcome is irrelevant.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And there you go. And that just sticks totally to comedy, where if you just worry about telling the joke perfectly, well, if nobody laughed, it didn't matter. You told it perfectly. So focus on the action, not the outcome.
Which is so essential, and that's why someone like you who's been in the business and does it for years, and you're able to make peace with why you're doing it, right? Because and fortunately, I feel, very selfishly, the lockdown happened at such a right time, because I was spiraling, and fortunately I've had time to withdraw from that way of thinking and sort of just take a step back and take stock of what I'm doing. And so after a point, you're doing 3 gigs, 10 gigs a month, and you just sort of lose appreciation for those shows. You're like, oh God, 10 people showed up. But as you just said, it's 10 more than you had last week, or it's whatever, but they've come to see you and they need to laugh and you want to make them laugh. But yeah, it's so important to hear it for someone like you hear it from someone like you who's been in the business for 25 plus years, because that's what is sustainable, right? Thinking from this point of view, as opposed to looking at what you don't have, looking at other people and comparing yourself, going, I'll never be that, because that just damages you and damages your material.
Yeah, and if you're in that mindset for even half of a day, well, that you could be writing wonderful jokes, other than looking at somebody telling jokes you don't like and going, why are they getting that? The jokes have to come from you, and if you're in that negative space, and don't get me wrong, being in a bit of a foul mood can help you write a really good joke.
Yeah.
But
if you're too happy, I don't think it's helpful.
No, that's the other side. It's all a balance. But I mean, like you said about the lockdown coming at the right time. I mean, I was really resentful of the lockdown, and then about a month into it, I just looked at it. My kid was 2 years old at the time, and we only had one at the time, and I just went, you know what? My dad never had this with me. He didn't get to stay home every day. And me and my wife and kid we just went for long walks every day. We were having picnics. It was springtime in England, and it was we were out in the countryside, and we just had a blast. And I was worried that my kid was going to think that like life is always like this, because I could even see the end of the lockdown coming and go, he's going to be very spoiled for time with me. But yeah, I just took it for what it was, and I really enjoyed the time I spent with my kid, and then that's all brilliant. You can do. You go, yeah. You look at what's in front of you, and you can complain about it. And I mean, I got friends online that are still complaining about the lockdown and vaccines and stuff, and I'm just like, regardless of what you feel about it, or what if you feel mistakes were made, guess what? It's over. We're out of the house. Like you can keep going back and point and go, see, I said they should have done this when they did this, and then they didn't do it right. And it's like, well, okay, you let it eat you up for how many more years, and then you realize that you've missed out on all this other time and all these other great things. Just accept it.
I think that's the notion, right? In anything, whether it's people being bitter, people being anti-vaccine, people being anti-mask, or people being from the lab leak theory, whatever their thing, they're so hell-bent on proving that it's right or wrong. And even as a comedian, if you're so angry and you're so bitter with other comedians or the business or the industry, you forget to live, and then after that you get stuck in that cycle of that way of thinking, and it's so hard to come out of it. Yeah,
I don't think the internet helps either. They get my problem with the internet is I click on all these crazy theories, so my algorithm thinks that I think that, so I get pushed a lot of these things, and I just wanted to read what they were thinking. I feel like I should, I wish there was a button that said, I don't believe this, I'm just interested to see what they think. But
another thing in the comedy sense, I want to ask you, sorry for interrupting, I just wanted your thoughts while we're on the topic of the internet, is, when you're in a room, like say we transport ourselves to the Comedy Store or some of these clubs which have such beautifully designed rooms for laughter, and if there are 300 people, you'll probably get 300 people laughing at you. I might get 150. I'm saying it's not so much the numbers, but it's the energy of laughter. But if you take that to the internet, it doesn't translate to just the laughs, but it's the views. How many people? Where was that shot? Is it on YouTube? Is it on Amazon Prime? Is it on Netflix? So it becomes more about those things, or it becomes about the Instagram Reels, how many views it got, how many followers you have. So it's not that laughter and what that energy the laughter is doing, but it's more the numbers. And that's no good for anyone sitting at home uploading videos every day or trying to perform on stage, right?
Yeah, they focus on what the number in the corner is and not what the feeling of what you just said was, and then it also starts to affect what they say, because they're not looking at the feeling of what they've done. They're looking at the numbers. So they'll say something very similar to the last thing that made that number jump up,
Mm.
and then at that point, are you the artist, or is the number the artist? You know what I mean?
That's crazy, yeah, because they try to replicate that. And do you feel, as a collective, the sort of comedy space, of what people find sort of acceptable as comedy, does that get affected, or does that change with a few elements, right? One is the internet, things going viral. Obviously, the machine thing kind of predicts, okay, this is what people are consuming. The people also who are consuming that have this benchmark. It's either completely, if you look at political comedy, it's completely pro something or anti something. It's pro vaccine, anti vaccine. So it's extremes. So as a result, that is what gets driven to one group. And then secondly, then you have the what is acceptable when it comes to language, offensive, sensitivity. So then as a result, over time, the whole landscape of what is considered funny and what is considered acceptable in the space of funny, doesn't that change?
It does, and then, like I say, the internet is not helping with that, because it's divided us. You'd think this, it's it's actually funny what happened with the internet, because it started out as the greatest invention that we'd ever made, and we were
Yeah.
all alive to be at the start of it. It was so amazing, and it took a few years to catch on, but it was like, wow, we've really created something, and this could really help humanity. And then we just used it to divide ourselves and argue.
Yeah. Yeah.
It could have been so much more, but and you see, I think young people are pretty ensconced in it. But I mean, I'm 48, and I've
Mhm.
got a fair few mates that, like guys I went to high school with. They're just not on it anymore. They're just like, oh yeah, no, I got, they're fishing, they're hunting, they're spending time with their kids, and maybe they'll look at Facebook once a month, but even that's going less and less. Like, if you leave a message for them there, they're like, "Oh, don't, not here." WhatsApp maybe.
Mm.
So yeah, yeah, and I think a lot of people would do well with less internet, more quality. But I mean, that's the problem too. Is once you go over a certain tipping point, you don't see the people that aren't on the internet anymore. You're not around them, and it just pulls you in deeper, and you lose out on a lot of the good things that are not internet based at all.
So do you think that, because it's almost like, earlier, I mean, I'm saying maybe in 2000, it would say you have to go, like in New York, they have this thing called the Laughing Buddha, right? Which is they organize these open mics, they organize these rooms where these scouts would come and check you out, and then maybe put you in touch with another thing. So there would be a more physical tryout. So you would go, say, apply to the Edinburgh Fringe, or do the Best in the Fringe, or the Just for Laughs, one of these festival approaches. But now
Yeah.
it seems like everyone has to get, these videos up, these clips, these reels up. Do you think a person who's starting out maybe 5, 10 years back, or maybe someone starting out now, can they even survive, or can they even get better without being on the internet? Do you think that's a possibility?
Yeah, I don't know. Because I don't know if those rooms are still there. Yeah. I mean, it's funny though. Like, even though the idea of those rooms, they can be quite sobering when you find out what the general public thinks. Because I remember I was in New York, and this was maybe this would have been 10 or 15 years ago, but one of the lineups I was on, and this was just in a basement of a bar in New York, and it was me, Eddie Pepitone, Bill Burr, Questlove was playing the drums, and Hannibal Buress was not on the bill. He was the DJ. He was DJing people, and like it was just such an amazing show to be on. And I remember I did my set, and then the room was quite packed and small, so you had to actually go out a back way, and then so I joined the back of the room, but I hadn't gone through the crowd, so I was just standing there, and nobody knew I was there, and I just remember Burr was closing, and I stood behind a guy, just like a sort of New York hipster with his wool hat sort of pulled down and constantly sucked in cheeks, and he just turned to his buddy at the end of the night after seeing that Power Pack show. He goes, "What was that? Some sort of amateur night?" he's seen $1 million show. Like if you try to put that together now, it'd be fucking $3,000 a ticket. What the hell was that? Jesus, what's wrong with these people? Not one of them. Not one of them made me laugh.
Wow. No, and that just goes to show, right? Like, and that's I didn't want to hint at that everything about putting your videos online is bad. It's just that it's a sense of privilege that the person gets because they're getting this video on their device, right? They have the luxury of sitting at home going, what is it? But at the same time, you'd have people come for a live show expecting you to think. But so I don't know if there's right or wrong, but but even these physical rooms is really hard because when I went to visit my girlfriend in New York in 2014, I went, we walked past the comic strip and I met someone and they ran a comedy workshop. I said, I don't have time to do the workshop, but can I get, they said, yeah, you can get on stage if you do a bringer show, you get 5 people along. And fortunately, all my friends at that point were working in New York, so they could afford those $15 tickets. And then, after like the 4th show I called them for, they're like, dude, we spent like $100 on the same fucking 5 minutes you've been doing. At least write new stuff or don't call me back for this. So I get it. It's hard. Like that joke after, I had that joke going, what's the deal with New York streets? After 1, 2, 3, 4, what's the deal with Lex? Is Lex a replacement for 5? They're like, yeah, it was funny the first time, but not. Anyway, it was a stupid bit, trying to be one of those local observational bits. But anyway.
Yeah.
But I remember on that trip, I went to the Comedy Cellar. Obviously, the show was sold out. So I asked the guy at the ticket counter, I said, do you guys do open mics? And he just looked at me. He goes, hey, buddy, do people practice pitching at the Yankee Stadium? I'm like, I don't know. What is that supposed to mean? What's that supposed to mean? I don't follow baseball.
Well, actually, I was like, do they practice pitching?
Yes.
Well, they do. There's the bullpen where they warm up. So yeah, that guy doesn't have very good similes.
Yeah,
I know what he means, though.
Yeah, I think he basically meant saying, "Don't waste my time," which I got pretty quickly. But yeah, no, it's amazing. That with podcasting now, you hear these stories from, guys like as you just said in the green room, they were sitting having a beer, and suddenly like this big comedian walks in or that, and. I'll be honest with you. It's not at all a debate whether the internet is good for comedians or bad. Clearly, there are, positive cases from everything. But I really, miss the days where, when we would sit and get whether positive criticism for your bit or a suggestion for another bit or this thing. And it just brings this idea together that, your goal is not to outdo the other or to get more successful than the other. Of course, that might or might not happen. That's not in our control. But it's to kind of enjoy the process of making those people who've come there laugh or the next group of people laugh. And I stopped feeling that for some time over the past few years. I don't know why that's happened.
Yeah. No, you're correct. That's got to be the goal. And when that goes, yeah, it's best to identify it and make sure you try and find the joy, because over the long term, that's the only reason to do it. Because it's like you say, it's about control, and that's the only thing you can control. It's just a lot of time fame or the next level. It's definitely has to do with talent, but it's also it's luck a lot of the time. too. Like I've got friends who've like Jim Jeffries, who we mentioned. He was blessed enough to have been punched in the head on stage, and they put the.
I think we've all seen that video, right? Yeah.
I know he was world famous. Now he had the talent to back it up, but he was he was doing club gigs, and then some guy didn't like his joke and thump, and there you go.
There's actually a poster in one of the rooms.
Bastard.
Yeah, we used to run a room. I mean, there was a bar in Bangalore called Take 5, and it was just like this small bar which ran these live gigs, and I used to run open mics every Monday, I think back 2016, 17, 18. And there's a poster of Jim Jeffries actually doing a gig there in 2004. No one knew he'd even come to Bangalore. It was like a 25, 30-seater. And, just these crazy things. As you just said, what a lucky break, right? Getting a bottle thrown at you or getting punched by someone's brother. It's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I talked to Jim. Like I said, we just opened for him on his English tour. And he told me something about that night I didn't know. But one of the other acts on the bill was Michael McIntyre. It was back before McIntyre was famous. Yeah, yeah. McIntyre was on. Was the act on before Jim, and he said, So he got punched, and it was right before the break, so it stopped. But there was a big hubbub, and Jim had to be helped down to the dressing room because he was a bit, there's a staircase down the backstage, so he had to be helped, and he was sat down, and everybody's coming in and asking Jim if he's okay, and McIntyre's just standing in the corner, and he's like, "What happened?" And Jim's like, I got punched in the head, man," and McIntyre goes, "See? No one can follow me."
Was he prancing up and down? Like how he does?
Yeah. Nobody can hit him. He was skipping. He couldn't get a gauge on what height his head was going to be. That's why he skips, so you can't punch him.
Wow, that's one of those bits, those bits of information you'd never hear, Wow.
No. Yeah. As I was telling her, I was like, I wonder if I'm allowed to tell this, but I don't give a fuck anymore.
Well, you know what? I just call Michael McIntyre prancing, so I think he might get more upset. So it's fine.
Yeah. And to be fair, that sounds like I'm riding Michael down. McIntyre, he was actually, I liked him when he was on the circuit. Because he was very much like that, and that's very much a comment he would make. But I was always quite charmed by that self-belief, and I like Michael, and he's sometimes can rub. He definitely rubbed people the wrong way when he was on the circuit, but It was funny. Yeah, they certainly changed their tune. Once he had his road show, and everybody was getting rich and famous off of it. Oh, the perceptions of Michael on the circuit changed very quickly. We're like, I never had a problem with him. I always liked. Yeah, that wasn't. Yeah.
It's so interesting that perception changes, right? Like or maybe even as an audience or someone here who's watched some comedians over the years, when I used to watch a lot more comedy before I was a comedian, right? But like Ed Byrne or Jimmy Carr, and then you go for the Fringe and you see the reality, like 9,000 shows a day. Most people, 8,995 probably get like 5 people for the show. And then you have the best in the Fringe, this award which no one gets unless, of course, you have 10 cards, you're black, you're lesbian, you have no leg, you have this, you check all the boxes, and then suddenly you're a winner, And then the perception just cracks in front of you. And that's what happened at the Fringe, where I'm like, you know what? I remember, doing the thing, you write to the Flying Scotsman, you write to all these basic people to come and rate your show. And a year and a half after coming back from the Fringe, someone sends me a link saying, hey, by the way, you got a review for your Fringe show. And it is a 2.5-star rating, or maybe even less, where this lady says, an attempt at comedy with blokey humor. I'm like, fucking, thank God I didn't read that when I was there. Wow, it hurt even though the
Well,
show is done.
hey, mate, I'm telling you, don't read those reviews. They're not, a review is not for a comedian. A review is for an audience member who wants to see if they'll like the show. But in all reality, if a reviewer could do an hour of comedy, they would be. They don't get paid very much. If they were able to sustain an hour, it doesn't mean they can't write from an audience perspective and go, well, I think you'd like this, or I think you wouldn't. But they should never inform your performance because they're not talented enough to do that.
So the thing is now, you have a lot of that, noise in whether it translates to the internet, or you say these platforms, right, where it comes to Netflix or whatever. And there's a new. I'm sure you're aware of the trend that it's not about how funny your show is, but it's about how many people you can pull to the platform. And similarly, it's how many people you can pull to the fringe at your shows. So the thing is. What have you observed has changed with the language around comedy, and with that I mean the literal language, but also just the expectations from comedy, and maybe something related to that question or that thought is, what does comedy do for you?
Yeah, it definitely has. It has changed. Where there's certain topics that are it's just not worth it to bring it up, regardless of your position on it, because people will automatically judge you, and they'll put up defense barriers before you've said what you're gonna say, and then they're like, oh, you said that transphobic stuff. I was like, I didn't say anything. I was speaking about trans people, but it was not transphobic, but or what have you. That's just an example. Not that I have transphobic material.
Yeah.
But I do know, like, there are people who have gotten in a lot of trouble for speaking about that issue. And I mean, I've heard the material that they were doing, and I was just like, they're not. That's not hate filled what they're saying, And I don't agree with it, but I don't think that they shouldn't be allowed to say it. And a lot of there's been a fair few people that there's clubs they're no longer allowed to work because the bartender says, well, I'm not going to come in if they're in because I don't like what they said. And I can't ever. I first of all, like, why the bartenders are picking who is supposed to be on stage,
Yeah.
I can't see that being sustainable. But a lot of the time too, it's now sort of transpiring that there was no usher, there was no bartender who had a problem with it. It was the promoter who blames, I can't name them because that would be cruel to them, and they don't exist. It was just me lying,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not sustainable even for the promoters because, I mean, sorry, please finish your thought, but yeah.
No, that was basically what I wanted to say.
Yeah, no, because
about that.
It's very limiting, right? I mean, to have this very acceptable narrative when it comes to something like comedy, because comedy, there's so many acts I don't laugh at. There's so many acts that make me cry. They're so funny. But who am I, or who are we as a certain selected group to say that one shouldn't exist because I didn't laugh, or because even after becoming a father, there's certain comedians who I used to laugh at, like with jokes about babies. I'm like, I get it why I laugh, but I don't appreciate it anymore. But it doesn't mean I go back and say this is ridiculous, But it's just it's hypocrisy, right?
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about this the other day. I remember, and I've heard this story. It's like an urban myth, but it was happening definitely when I was in high school, and up until now. There's a story about some guy got caught with a bunch of weapons, and he'd bought a front row ticket to whatever the boy band is at the time. Because I've heard it through things, and they were like, yeah, they caught him at security, but he was gonna jump on stage and attack them and what, you know, but always told in like wouldn't that have been great if like NSYNC had got beat up by that guy. And first of all, I don't care who you are. There's 5 of those guys, and they're trained dancers. They will kick your ass if you got out. If you like, you're not like Bruce Lee. You're not like they're very strong, regardless of what you think about their music. You're not going to walk through them. But beyond that,
they're strategically bronze.
Yeah. They do it. They do it like the Sharks and the Jets. They come snapping.
They just tire you out through their moves.
Yeah. To a dance off. But like anytime somebody tells that story, it's always in like, wouldn't that have been great if that band had been attacked? And I always thought, no, I just don't listen to them. Why do they need to be knifed on a stage?
Yeah.
Like, where are you hearing them that much that it even matters? And but that's basically that sort of attitude is what people are trying to do. Like, well, I don't find it funny, so nobody should watch it. And it's just like, just let it happen away from yourself. You don't have to be that guy in the front row going, I'm going to get up there and change it all, you know, because I don't like it, so nobody would like it, right?
Yeah.
That's not the way it is it?
That's a sense of entitlement, right? You get how much ever you pay for your Netflix subscription, you get unlimited content. Suddenly you think that just because you get that content, you also get the permission or the right to have that content taken away, which is bullshit, right?
Exactly. Well, and also, a lot of this time where things have, you feel things have to be banned. The whole sensibility is based on a outmoded idea, which is that this is on the television and we can't choose to not watch it. If you are constantly bombarded with things that you don't like or you don't want to listen to, well, you just don't have a very good grasp of technology, because it's very easy to switch. I could see if like if a 90-year-old man was like, well, I don't know how to switch it, then it's like, okay, well, fair enough. I can't turn it off. Okay, well, I'll turn it off for you. But if you're a 24-year-old person that still hasn't figured out Netflix, well, that's your issue. That's not my issue.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And so I think it's just one of those things, I'm sitting on the sidelines for the past couple of years and kind of just biding my time, because just knowing, okay, when I'm ready, I will get back on stage. But it's nice and encouraging to hear from someone like you with your experience, and thanks so much for sharing your stories and everything that you have been through. And
I really enjoyed this chat.
Thank you. And what's in store? What lies ahead for your plans? You have any shows coming up? Anything outside the UK? Anything in the UK?
Well, I'm getting ready for Edinburgh. That starts in 20 days. But I'm not risking a terrible amount this year. I've got a really small room, and I'm just going up to have fun. I'm not looking to make a big splash or anything. I'm just, like I say, I've just sort of, it's just all about the jokes, and I'm just going to have fun. Talk to the audience. It doesn't matter. It's just, I know I can make a room laugh for an hour, and I'll do whatever I want in that time frame. So I'm looking, excuse me. It's sort of a new way for me of doing Edinburgh, where I used to spend a lot of money in pre-production of, PR and a lot of, a big splash, a big poster, and all these things all over town. And I don't care to do that anymore. It's just go up, have fun, not risk too much, because it's and once you have a family, if I'm gonna blow 10 grand, I'm gonna do it on my family, and we're gonna have had a lovely holiday. There's no more of that in Edinburgh for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Which room are you doing at the Fringe?
It's called the Attic. It's in the Beehive. It's a perfect little 60-seater box room, the top of a pub. Yeah, it's perfect for comedy. Actually, the Monkey Barrel, which is a famous comedy club in Edinburgh, they had started out in this room before they bought their venue. So it's got that sort of pedigree. And I played it last year, and I absolutely loved it. It's everything the Fringe should be. It's not too big. It's not too pricey. It's just it's easy to get a beer, and the beer is reasonably priced. It's a lot of good things, and the people who run it, Rick Mullen and Sully O'Sullivan, are just great guys. And if it didn't exist, I don't think I would go back to the festival. I think that like I say, the big splash is done, and it's lovely that these guys have sort of popped up and are doing things right.
That's really good to hear, because when we did the Fringe, it was 2017. Obviously, earlier that year they had the other leg of the Fringe, which was the Perth Fringe. So it was my first time ever doing an international festival. I did some stuff in Singapore, but so my wife traveled with me to help out. And so when we did Perth, we were doing this show with a Singapore comedian, a Malaysian comedian, Quill Potter, who's a Australian comedian. And no, was it Quill? No, it wasn't Quill. Sorry, that he's going to get upset if I say his name. Not Quill. It's another guy. I forget his name. He was an Australian guy, and it was myself, and the show is called Asian Invasion. So it was like this position show. Right. And my wife said, okay, we'll go for 10 days. Let's see how this festival. It's exciting, right? So then we're supposed to get an apartment with these other two comedians with separate bathrooms, but we only got one. And my wife's like, oh, after the second day, she's like, I'm not living with these guys. It's filthy, right? So the only condition for the Fringe in Edinburgh was I don't care if you don't do a single gig or get a single laugh, but we are staying in a nice place where we have our own bathroom, have our privacy, because that really traumatized her, So I'm like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, I'd rather make it a holiday where I'm doing some shows than I'm doing shows and we're just sort of, sharing it with 6 other people.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. Yeah. You reminded me when you told me that. The Flight of the Conchords, Jermaine is a really good mate of mine, and he came this is when I was living in Vancouver. He was shooting a movie there, so we went out for lunch, and he was telling me a story about the first time the Conchords left New Zealand. They played a Fringe festival in Calgary, which is in Alberta, which is part of Canada, and they had a really good run. They played 7 nights. They sold out every night. They had their money, their pockets were stuffed with cash, and they just thought that that's the way it is at Fringe festivals. You sell out every night. It doesn't matter. So they come to Vancouver the next week, and they put them in this weird venue that nobody knows. They put it in a part of town that nobody is aware of. So they spend all day flyering out front of this venue, and they go that night. They come in, and there's one person. There's one person in the audience. And it gives you an idea how long ago this was. Their sound person was Taika Waititi. From he went on to direct Thor and all these things. But he's flown in, so they're thinking, well, I mean, we might as well do the show because Taika needs to learn the cues anyway. So, we'll just treat it as a rehearsal and, whatever. We'll just have fun with it. So they both go out on stage, lights go down, they do an hour, they're singing their songs and stuff. 1 hour comes up, lights go up, and the lady's gone. And they don't know when she left.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
It's so grounding to hear these stories, because I felt bad because one of my worst shows at the Fringe. I mean, I had many bad shows, but one of them was so bad that the turnout was so low, and the response from that turnout was so low that a homeless guy came and used the back of the room to get an hour's sleep. He's He just went back and lay down, and he's like, "This is nice and quiet. No one's going to disturb me."
Oh, yeah.
At least he didn't turn around and say, "Hey, buddy, can you keep it down? I'm trying to sleep." At least he didn't say that. But everything else, oh wow.
Oh, that's great. That's
God,
great. And he probably was another performer.
yeah. At the Fringe, that's a very close call.
Yeah.
It's the next show. It is the next show.
Yeah, he's on next. The sleepy.
Oh, wow.
Sleepy comedy stylings. Excellent. Well,
it's been brilliant talking to you,
anyway.
and I'd love people to come check out your
too.
podcast, Egypts, right? EEGITS of the world.
EEJITS of the world. That's
All right.
Glenn Wall and Andrew Maxwell. And,
Brilliant. We'll link it in the description.
I would love it if we had. Yeah, and I'll know if you do it because we can see where the people in the world have done it. So if I could spike our India numbers, I would be impressed. So,
absolutely.
I'm
pretty sure people will head over, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. And thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Glenn. Cheers.
You're welcome.